Welcome to Chatterbox. Today I'm joined by my regular sparring partner, Carl Frampton, and boxing journalist, Tris Dixon. We're going to be speaking about the allegations of drug use within boxing and how we can restore the reputation of the sport. I want to open up with Eubank Ben. I know it was a fight that we were all buzzing to see, and we talked about it at length. I was at the press conference. We were just getting ready for it to start, but it looked like we may never get to see it now. You're a man in the know. Tell us what we know about this whole episode.
The fight fell apart with just a couple of days to go in the end. You mentioned the press conference. They ended up obviously announced at the press conference that the fight was off because of a positive finding on Conor Benn's VADA test. And obviously that, I suppose, in many ways should have been that. It turns out that came to light to all the, in inverted commas, necessary parties on September 23rd. But they still left it to the 11th hour to cancel / postpone the event. As you said, it was a fight we were all looking forward to for various reasons, not just because of the fathers, not just because of the grudge, but because of this catchweight scenario, which obviously after what's happened now, it becomes even more of a talking point. But obviously with Conor Benn going up in weight and Chris Eubank Jr. coming down in weight, we didn't know where the advantage would be, whether Eubank would still be just too big, or if the advantage would slip towards Conor Benn with Eubank having to drain himself, as Eubank was telling us on a regular basis. As it turned out, we didn't get to find out. We've been told that we probably will get to find out at some time or another. I'm sure we will discuss that. But that's the lay of the land, and we're still waiting for confirmation. Ben says he's going to clear his name. Eddie's talked about due process being needed, and obviously that is required one way or another, innocent or guilty. We need to get to the bottom of what's happened.
Just to be clear, we don't know the full details of what's been going on. However, we're just talking about what has been reported in the media.
How can it be? How can we get this situation, Tris, where someone fails a drug test by you on a VADA test, but that's not acknowledged by UCAD, and the fight can potentially still go ahead?
So, interesting question, Carl. And I don't claim to be a massive expert on doping, although I do know bits, obviously having been around boxing for a long period of time and studied a lot of these cases quite closely. Obviously, the test VADA could have been done on a different day to UCAD. And so obviously, if they'd found trace amounts, then maybe a day or so later he would have been clear. And so if UCAD had tested him a couple of days later, then maybe the sample that he produced would have been different. So you can say that. Also, VADA is a different testing agency. I'm sure that both agencies probably do test for clomiphene, which is a female fertility drug which was what trace amounts were found of with Ben's VADA test. But VADA is very comprehensive, and it does test for more substances than UCAD. And people do say that VADA is the gold standard, and it really is because of the amount of things it does test for. And obviously, when we look at these positive tests that have littered the landscape for the last few years, the majority of them have been found by VADA.
For me, trace amounts means an incredibly small amount of something. Do you believe that there's any way that this could have inadvertently got into his food, into a protein shake and stuff like that? Because his strength and conditioning coach is well renowned amongst the boxing industry. He's somebody who's worked with a lot of major fighters. There's never been any kind of claims of cheating or drug use. How does that happen? And is a trace amount mean you're completely guilty, or is it a trace amount that it's one size fits all?
Well, I suppose, it's easy for us to say from the outside looking in that it's a one size fits all. Like if it's a trace amount, then it's in your system, right? But I'm sure that there are instances where there are loopholes and grey areas, and it's not as black and white as it seems. However, the experts have said about clomiphene that there is no way that it comes into your system via contamination or anything like that, because it is a female fertility drug, and it is used by people in the male population to increase their levels of testosterone.
We've had this before with Canelo's situation, who got a 6-month ban in 2018 after traces of clenbuterol, which he blamed on tainted meat, and it never seems to get mentioned now. So, is it the situation where if Ben has an excuse similar to this one, or whether you believe it or not, is it something that can be forgotten quickly, or should it be forgotten quickly?
That's a great question. Because Canelo's far from the only one. Obviously, the Hall of Shame is going back and back and back now in terms of boxing and our track record, and it's really not starting. It's really not looking great. Um, I mean, I can't remember the last time anyone actually held their hands up and said, "Okay, you got me." We've heard these excuses, whether it's wild boar, tainted meat, protein shakes, contamination. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is. When is and also you've got to factor in this. Whenever this sort of thing happens, people's nearest and dearest, family, relatives, trainers pile in and say, "Oh, we know him. He'd never do it." And he's clean. He's a clean athlete. I know him. I think the thing is, this is something that I think is so shameful for people that do it. I don't think they would tell anybody. I don't think that they would go on stuff and say to their best friend or even their partner, certainly not their coach, who they want to respect them, and say, "Oh, do you know what? I'm on stuff," and because they know they're not going to get approval for it in terms of ethical approval. So I think these people, maybe it is maybe there is more going on behind closed doors than we think. And sometimes I think boxing's extremely behind the curve with nutrition, with training, with conditioning, lots of stuff along those lines. And I want to believe it's massively behind the curve with PEDs. I want to believe it is. But then we hear stuff, and you reference the doctor there, Dr. Usman Sajid, who I think claims 80 to 90% of the fighters he knows, or he knows of 80 to 90%, the 80 to 90% was the figure he used in a YouTube video where he was saying that he thinks that amount of athletes are on it. And maybe, I mean, I hope I'm massively naive and idealist and think that that's not the case. And I'm sure it's not that much, but I think it's probably more than we realize. And I do think that these guys probably are cheating, not mentioning the names that we've talked about, but I think that if people are cheating, they're probably not going to tell anybody about it because they're probably ashamed by it.
That's such a good point, Tris, that everybody jumps on board and says, "I know this guy would never do it," but if you're taking it, are you telling anybody? You're not even telling your wife. You're literally keeping that to yourself. I think it's a sense of, well, a few reasons why you would keep it to yourself. It's shameful, really. You'd be embarrassed that you're having to do this. I think the point that you made about Dr. What's his name? Usman.
Dr. Usman Sajid.
Yeah, so he said
Sajad,
80 or
yeah.
90% are taking it. That's like, if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago, I don't think it was an issue really in boxing. I thought there was maybe one or two, maybe a top guy with money doing it. But now I believe that it's more rife. I think that figure that he talked about is massively inflated, massively inflated. But I think there's more people doing it than we would like to believe, and it's wrong as well. And the point that you made, Josh, about trace amounts, and I you know I was in a decent amateur setup. I was on the Irish High Performance team, and it was drilled into us what we could take and what we couldn't take, to the point where I had psoriasis, and all I needed was an ointment with steroids on it. I refused to take this my whole career until I finished boxing, and that's cleaned my psoriasis up. So that's how strict and stringent I was for myself. Um, I knew what supplements I could take, and I would never bought anything over the counter that I was unsure about. So we're all professionals here. It has to be the same. Everybody needs to be serious about this and what they're doing. And I was one of the guys who kind of lifetime bans and stuff. And maybe it was being a bit too critical, because I imagine there is guys who have taken things unknowingly or accidentally or whatever. In saying that, the ban should be much stricter, and there should be more of a deterrent. And these, 6 months, 1 year, even 2 years, it's not really enough. And there just needs to be harsher consequences for someone that gets caught cheating.
Yeah, can I add to that? I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I think, it's a shame, but boxing has so many loopholes. Obviously, we don't have one overall governing body, right? So even if a fighter was banned in the UK by UCAD, they could be fighting in Saudi by the end of the year, right? Like that's a fact, and or they could go and fight in Texas, for instance, or whatever the case may be. They could get a license somewhere else. We know about Latvia, the Luxembourg commissions, all the rest of it. Just because they're banned in one place, and we've seen this on matters of health and safety and fighter safety in boxing before, right? Where a fighter has failed a medical in Las Vegas, so they've gone and got licensed elsewhere against the interests of anyone with any medical sound mind, but they've still gone ahead and done it. And it's the same with penalties, suspensions. Obviously David Hay Chisora is one that we often go back to with their fight in Munich and then them fighting over here, but under the Luxembourg commission. Like there's so many loopholes and so many things to do. But I do agree with you, Carl. Like there's no deterrent. Like I would like to think that if someone is guilty of taking performance enhancing drugs, I would love for trainers to stop working with them. I would love for promoters to stop putting them on their shows, rather than just have to rely on bans being handed down. Like take an ethical and moral stance against these guys.
It's happened many times before where promoters try to put fights on, and I imagine that if this was a lesser fight, guys getting paid 10 or 15 or 20 grand, then they make an example of these boys. But because there was so much money to be made in this fight, then they try to, push on with the fight, and it's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong.
I mean, people still now, obviously Anthony Joshua and these a comeback opponent, right? And I still see people in boxing saying, "Oh, let's get that Jarrell Miller fight on because there's a good storyline." No, don't reward him. Guy's failed
Yeah.
umpteen drug tests. Why are you giving him the payday and the opportunity of a lifetime ahead of all the deserving guys that are maybe ranked 5 to 15? Why give him the shot? Why should it? And people say, "Oh, because of the storyline." No, he cheated. Why give him this great opportunity? But you're exactly right. Worse than it being a deterrent, sometimes the red carpet's rolled out for these guys, and it sucks.
This is
Yeah, I
the
mean,
thing with this fight. There was a chance there when the news broke that there was a chance that the fight was still going to go ahead. The harsh reality is both guys would have made more money if the fight would have went ahead because of the controversy surrounding the fight, which again is wrong as well.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that absolutely enraged me when they said, "Oh, well, the fighters are fine with it. Legally they've checked it out, and and they've and the fighters are fine." And Carl, you'll know this. We've had conversations about CTE and boxing. It's the fighters that need the protection. Of course, Chris Eubank wants to fight. Of course, he wants the money. But like you've got to be looking out for these guys.
It shouldn't be his
And then
decision. I said the exact same,
exactly.
Tris. It should be taken away from him and any fighter on the planet. Chris Eubank, his mentality and his thought process would have been, if this guy's cheating, I'm going to beat him whether he's taking drugs or not. That's the thought process of a fighter, but it shouldn't be up to them. It should be taken away from them.
We spoke about bans and bans being stricter, maybe that making a better deterrent for the use of PEDs in boxing. But why is there such disparity in the length of bans? We've seen some of our favourite fighters right now, who've served 2-year bans, 6-month bans, and then Jarrell Miller, we spoke about twice been caught up in doping scandals, but he's had 2 fights after serving a 2-year ban. Like, who decides these bans, and why are they so lenient in some cases? A 6-month ban, a lot of people fight twice a year anyway, 3 times a year anyway. You miss one fight and you're back in.
Yeah, didn't Jarrell Miller make his comeback on a WBA KO drug show as well, which is just absolutely insanity. I think it's a great question. Like you said, the 6-month ban is ridiculous when these guys are fighting twice a year, and they might even backdate the ban as well, which has happened. I think that the reason why is it needs to be down to the commissions to hand out the bans, and no one's singing off the same hymn sheet. Like I said, you could get banned in Texas but fight in New York. You could get banned in Vegas but fight in LA. You could get banned in the UK and fight in Germany. You know, it's no one agrees upon a set punishment. It would be handy if they did, and I think I agree with Carl. Like going into what we've recently experienced, which I thought was just the whole thing was a calamity for the sport, the whole week and the way it was dealt with. I was kind of liberal and thinking, you know, maybe one, if not two bad tests, and then a third strike you out. Now I've gone the other way, and I saw Carl's reaction saying, you know, maybe ban them straight away. I honestly think I'm leaning towards that now because, you know, we're not playing tiddlywinks, right? We're not playing, and we're not running, and we're not jumping. These guys are hitting each other in the head and in the body, and they're changing their lives with each punch, you know, moving forwards. And I don't mean the acute damage on fight night. I'm talking about obviously CTE and long-term damage and stuff that happens in the years down the line. And as I mentioned, you know, there's some sparring partners that are probably getting the living daylights beaten out of them while these guys are taking stuff, which I think is tragic. So I think, you know, maybe if there was any kind of pattern, it would sound easy, but 2 to 3 year ban to wipe out some prime years, and then another chance, and then you're out. But right now, you know, it's crazy because, you know, it just seems to be almost completely lawless, and providing the money's right, these guys will just get churned out. One thing I will say is Carl was talking about, you know, being in charge of what goes into your body and stuff, and I agree with that 100%. And WADA has an app, and different organizations have an app. And if you're not sure, you can use a QR code, scan your stuff, you can check the ingredients and everything. It's really not difficult to make sure that you're a clean athlete, to make sure you're responsible for what's going in your body. And if you're not sure, you've got resources that you can call upon to find out. And, you know, it's really not tough.
I think the site's called DRO Global, something like that. And it's literally you put in, and I've used this so many times, you put in whatever your sport is, obviously boxing for me, so boxing, in competition, can I take any paracetamol, cocodamol? The list is endless of anything you want to check, and it tells you if it's prohibited or not prohibited. And I was always doing that. You know, another thing is that I didn't realize that I was around the Scott Quigg fight. I was approached about by UCAD about 24/7 all year round testing, and I agreed to it because I'd done it as an amateur, but I hadn't done it as a pro until that stage. So I agreed to it. To be honest, it's a bit of a pain in the ass because you're constantly having to keep up your whereabouts, and it's a nuisance. But if it's something that's going to stop people from cheating, then it's got to be done. I understand that it costs money, but when we get to a certain level, like I was against Quigg, or like Ben and Eubank were, there shouldn't be a fighter at that level who isn't filling in their whereabouts 24/7 and being available for drug testing any time of the year.
But let me play
devil's
it's
very straightforward, right?
Here.
When you're in camp.
Yeah, of course. But imagine this, right? You're at the top of your level. You're fighting Quigg, Santa Cruz, whoever it may be, world title fight. You are thinking purely about training. You're in camp. You know what it gets like. You train, you sleep, you train, and all you can think about is this one fight. So you offload some of these key things to a strength and conditioning coach, a nutritionist, and you expect those guys to have your best interests at heart. And they may feel like they've got your best interests at heart by, I don't know, adding a little special sauce to the protein shake or whatever it may be. And then you're getting, you know what I mean, you're then taking the brunt of that. And then this is why sometimes these fighters look so surprised. I think Kid Galahad, I think it's well known. I think he said his brother spiked his protein shake. You know, something like this.
Can I just say on trust, that, my brother spiked my protein shake is, you know, that's the excuse he used. But I mean, you know, how believable is that? When I heard that, it was almost laughable. I laughed at it.
But
I think the thing is, I think
is that you trust these guys.
But that's the thing. Do you actually trust them, or are you being lazy and employing people that don't really have your best interests at heart? Like, I know this is kind of a little bit bigger than boxing, but boxing life, you want the people around you that you can depend upon. And you're probably hiring the wrong people if you're hiring these sort of people that are peripheral characters. And also, like, I know I'm a bit of an old school boxing guy, but like, you know, what's your pedigree? What is your boxing pedigree, and how many years do you go back in the sport? You know, and there's a lot of people that do crop up out of nowhere with no back history, and they're just welcomed
Yeah.
in with open arms. Like, show me your pedigree, show me the dues that you've paid to get where you are, and then maybe we'll talk, and then you bring people in as you start to trust them. But there's a lot of guys appearing out of nowhere in gyms and around camps, people that you don't recognize in team photos and stuff. And you're like, well, where are all these people starting to come from?
Yeah.
And is it just because boxing's so easy to get into? You can go to the gym and start talking to a fighter. You can go to a press conference, start talking to a fighter straight away, and start getting in their ears straight away. It's too easy. In Premier League football, you obviously can't go and speak to a Premier League player, just, you know, unless you bump into them on the street. But in boxing, it's such an open door that none of these guys are getting seriously checked and vetted.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a really fair point.
we've spoken about this doctor. I was going to say we've spoken about this doctor quite regularly in this part of the show. How is he connected with so many boxers? How are these boxers not cut ties with him when he's with some of the biggest names in the game? How does that make them look? Especially some of those boxers have served the ban already.
Well, I mean, you got to say, you know, he's not been found guilty of doing anything, right? So you can't assume guilt. Obviously, what was interesting about him was he deleted his social media profiles on the day that the positive test came to light. But I know what you're saying. And then subsequently, obviously, Tyson Fury said he's going to have him back in his camp ahead of his next fight with Derek Chisora. And Anthony Fowler went on social media and started singing his praises as well, saying, oh, he's a great guy and all the rest of it. It's but really, and he was licensed by the Board of Control, by the British Boxing Board of Control. But I mean, you know, there's got to be a way, and I'm not saying that, you know, he should be a guy that's kept out or anything else. We obviously, again, due process and let the guy have his say and all the rest of it. We need to hear from him. But like, there are too many people on the peripheries of boxing that are bending fighters' ears and that are getting in camps and that do have power and sway. And really, you know, I used this line in a column recently. Boxing is the only sport in the jungle where the rats rule over the lions. And that's the case, right? The fighters don't realize they're the one in the strongest positions. Like, these guys of a high level can employ the very best that money can buy, and legit guys, and they can work out sponsorship deals and all the rest of it. So there's no excuse to not use people that aren't tried and tested, that don't have that pedigree, and that don't have, you know, years upon years of experience in the sport upon.
Do you think we'll ever see that fight, honestly, between all of us?
Money talks, so my gut instinct says yes. But for me, and I think that it will be a huge fight, but for me, it's somewhat tarnished given the foul taste that was left from the previous effort to get it on.